Okay, hello, welcome to this skill session. And this is going to be a lot of fun. This is all about attracting your ideal clients, right? We're going to give you examples of how literally some clients are worth 1,000 times more than other clients. And I'm going to give you some or an example from one of my businesses. So let's get to it. Think about this to start with. What type of clients cause you the most aggravation? Right? If you think in your business, and we've got all business types in here, we've got a climbing center, we've got self-storage, we've got interior fit out, we've got special needs learning, we've got training, we've got bakery business. So we've got all kinds of business types on here. But what type of clients give you the most aggravation? Is it the ones that spend the most with you, i.e. the biggest spenders, or is it the ones that spend the least? I'm curious. Feel free to comment in the chat. Is it the clients that spend the most, or is it the clients that spend the least? Who is the biggest pain in the ass typically? So Sonia says the least, always. Rob says the least. Steve says the least. Okay, good. So look, I'm not saying this is universally true, but as a balance, Billy says the least. When I do ask this question of bigger audiences, I would say that 80+% of people would say that it's the clients that spend the least amount of money are the biggest pain in the backside, right? So typically it's the cheapskates. In other words, they spend the least amount of money, but they take up the most amount of your time. Right, so they're not just take up the most admin time, but they're also cause the biggest headache, Ben. They also cause the biggest headache. I mean, this is true in your industry, Ben, right? And by the way, in your world, it might not be spending the least amount of revenue, but certainly the lowest margin on a GP basis, right? It's kind of like they want the world. You're making the least amount off them in GP terms for your world, Ben, and yet they demand the earth and typically have the worst payment terms. Probably the same is true for you as well, Steve, right? So what I'm trying to differentiate is how do we figure out, how do we get more of the more lucrative clients, right? Because the ones who spend the least, either in revenue terms or for some of you in GP terms, GP margin terms, that cause the most headache, the most admin, have the most hoops to jump through, David, from a compliance point of view, are the least profitable, right? And the opposite is also true, right? So I'll give a personal example for me from this business. I find I love all my clients and we're a premium service, okay? But many years ago, I used to do big conferences where there might be 500 to 1,000 people in a room that paid £100 or so for a ticket. And I'll tell you, some of the people that spent £100 for a ticket would cause me more aggravation for admin, for everything, for complaints, for bashing on social media than clients that have spent tens of thousands of pounds. Equally, I've got clients that have spent hundreds of thousands of pounds with me in this business that are the lowest drama, like they always take responsibility, they show up on time, and that they don't want to create a hassle. So this is when you apply the Pareto principle. Right, so these are some actual numbers, Steve, from a business of mine. It's from a few years ago now, but it's from a business of mine that I've since sold. But in the previous financial year, the last financial year when I owned the business, it had just shy of £2.5 million in revenue, right? And the split, I've split it down here, approximately 80-20. These are rounded figures, so they're not exact. So don't check my maths, David. But the point is, the top 20% of customers spent 1.9 million. And the $500,000 was the other 80% of customers combined. Right? So it was classically the 80-20 rule. And by the way, it doesn't always mean, Ben, that the top 20% of customers equal 80% of your revenue. What we're looking for is a discrepancy. The point that I'm making is that each customer isn't like for like. They're not the same. It could be the top 20% of your customers represent 50% of your revenue, or in your case, Steve, gross profit, right? So same thing, James, it's like your top 20% of customers could represent 80% of your revenue, 90% of your revenue, or it could just be, the point is, if it's more than 20%, it's weighted. Certain clients are higher caliber. But what's interesting about the Pareto principle, Billy, is it's fractal. So in other words, in this business of mine, which was Robert, this business was similar to yours. It was a marketing agency. The top 20% of the top 20%, it's split again the same way. So in other words, and I should have put the client numbers on here, as in the actual volume, but I did not, so forgive me. But in other words, the top 20% of the top 20%, which is a posh way of saying the top 4%, Rob, the top 4% of customers, so if there was 100 customers, the top 4 customers spent 80% of the 80% of revenue, which I can't check my math. Somebody can check me, Dave, but it equates to 4% of customers were contributing 60+% of the revenue for this business. And that's fascinating, because the point is, when you say we need to get more clients, Anne, Sonia, when you go, we need to get more clients, what type of clients do you want? We act like they're all the same. Oh, yeah, we just need more clients. Well, do you? Because if I've got a client that 4% of my clients spend 60% of my revenue, I can, in round figures, that would say one client equates to 15% of my revenue. Whereas if you've got 80 clients represent 20% of your revenue, you go, holy crap, I mean, I have to do my maths. Well, it'd be 0.25, wouldn't it? So it'd be 0.25 spend versus 15, right? And you're going to go, well, that's 60 times the value. That was quick maths, Ben, but I think I'm right from the top of my head. I'm like, so in this particular business, the top Pareto clients, the top 20% of the top 20% were worth 60x, if I've done my maths correctly, what the bottom clients were worth. So congratulations, son, you've got a new client. But the difference in the value of those clients over time can be 60-fold the contribution to GP. So is it worthy of differentiation? And by the way, the same is true of the inverse in terms of the headache. It's the tiny percentage that typically cause you all the headache. So the question is, can we target and get more of the high quality Pareto clients and eliminate the really crappy ones? And again, I want to be clear here, just so nobody positions me in today's social climate. It's not mean they're a bad human being. It just means they're a bad client for your business, right? They don't represent the right fit for your business. Okay, in the same way that there's nothing wrong with startup businesses, that I just don't work with startups anymore, so they're not a good fit for this business of mine. So how do you attract more of those clients? There's a little worksheet. You can scan the QR code. If not, I'm going to take it through you on the slide deck. But if you add you on a PDF worksheet to download, you can go away. But I'm going to take you through a very simple 6-part exercise, and then we're going to kick it over to Q&A. To be clear, Steve, I don't necessarily need you to do the exercise now, but I'm really trying, Billy, to make you think, because you can make life so much easier for you. So much easier. I think sometimes we forget, and there's businesses of different sizes on here and with different levels of profits. But sometimes because we're caught up in the day-to-day, we forget. And occasionally I've got an old friend or somebody that comes into my world and goes, oh my God, you've got life so easy, Dan. And I forget how much easier this business is to run now than it was perhaps 10 years ago. And that's in part largely, Ben, because I've got really clear about who my ideal client is, and I've just doubled and trebled down on them. So while the business revenue-wise, it's smaller than it was maybe 8 years ago. Quite a lot smaller, actually, in fact, significantly smaller than it was, millions of pounds a year smaller in revenue-wise. It makes a lot more profit. Why? Because I've figured out who the ideal client are, who the top 4% are, and I only work with those clients. Okay. So, if you went through that worksheet, here are the 4 steps, and we're not going to go through it painstakingly on here, but you get the idea. The first part is, who are your typical clients, right? Because to identify the Pareto clients, it's not good if you answer it theoretically. You've got to look at the different psychographics and demographics of your typical clients, because you're all established business owners with six, seven, or eight figure revenues. Okay, so you're established companies on here. Some have been around for decades, some have been around for maybe just 5 years, but you have clarity about what your typical client looks like. And by the way, Ben, don't give us a crappy answer. Oh, it's anybody. It's da, 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 da. Like if you were to bulk them together in terms of the median, what does the median client look like? I don't know what the youngest client I've had in this business, but it's probably somebody in their early 20s, I guess. And the oldest was 70, 72, maybe. So I go, oh, I want people from 20 to 70. Well, okay, that might be true, but the median is in the 40s. Right. And if you look around the people on this call, there's definitely some people that are perhaps in their 50s, but there's some people definitely in their 30s. I don't know if there's anybody in the 60s or the 20s, but if you took the median age, you'd be in their 40s. Okay, but there are other things that are more important about psychographics and demographics. But the point for doing that is then that allows you to go a step deeper. Right. So if you look back historically, Steve, and said, who spent the most money with me over time? Right, like who have I made, and depending on the nature of your business, you might say, who have I made the most gross profit from over time? Okay, and I'm always a bit wary since you're all clients on here. I don't want to pigeonhole too closely, but I will say that there are certain things that if you look at, it might be, for example, 50% of your clients are male, Sonia, and 50% of your clients are female. Right, and I know you're dealing with schools, but still the individual that's making the purchasing decision, let's say, 50% might be male and 50% are female. I bet you if you double down into your ideal clients, it might be skewed by sex. You might say of your best buyers, actually it's 70% female, 30% male, or the inverse. And of course, it might be nothing to do with sex. It might be to do with age. Right, so I don't mind sharing this example, candidly. I'm not saying that a client in their 20s can't be a great mastermind member. They absolutely can. But I know that their longevity in the program is poorer than somebody that's in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. And if you just think about that instinctively, that's kind of obvious. It kind of makes sense because they're more likely to be flighty, they're more likely to go out of business, right? They're more likely to make a reactive decision and not be robust. Okay. Well, all that means to me is, like, what if I were to tell you, Ben, that it's easier for me to get somebody in their 20s to sign up than somebody that's in their 40s? They'll buy more easily. The problem is they only stick for 1 year, where our average client might stick for 3 or 4 years on average. So right there, with that one little slant, you kind of go, clients are worth 3 or 4x. So who do I want to attract? And again, I want to be clear, I'm not trying to pigeonhole people because there's always exceptions to the rules, but you're looking for trends, habits. The same might be true, Sonia, from schools in wealthier areas, poorer areas. It might be school size, business size, right? Right, Rob, I'm almost certain in your business, you'll get more people sign up that are smaller, but actually their lifetime value will be weaker. They're a smaller business. Okay. Here's a great example from Paul Goff that he won't mind me sharing. So Paul Goff and his physiotherapy clinics, he figured out when he started as a physiotherapist, he thought he wanted to work in high level sports. He did some high level football physio work, and that's the type of clients that he wanted to attract. But after a very short space of time, he realized that actually they were really shitty clients. Because in his case, he was attracting people like he was, a man in his 20s. So a man in his 20s who's beat himself up at the weekend and got an injury, what does he want, Ben? He wants to get himself fixed and back out on the pitch. Right? So the lifetime value wasn't great. Do you know what Paul's figured out now? Women in their 50s. Okay? And what he's figured out is women tend to care more about their long-term health than men. And I'm repeating him here, so if you've got a complaint about this, take it up with Paul. But women care more about their long-term health than men, and they've got a higher disposable income than people in their 20s. And as soon as you just think about just those two criteria alone, you're going to go more disposable income and more inclined to rather than just go fix me, get me back out on the pitch, they're going, look, I'm in my 50s, my mother's in her 70s, and I've seen how her not being very mobile is really inhibiting her life. So I can be convinced to come for regular treatments, regular therapy in order to maximize my mobility as I age. And you're, huh? But it's demonstrated in the numbers. The point I'm trying to make, James, is this is not a theory. The question is, what are those discrepancies? So again, Ben, I mean, with multi-8-figure revenues, you may already have this, but like in Ben's interior fit out business, there's multiple arms of business, but just talking about that one, you might go, and this might be completely wrong, but you might go, I don't want somebody that's just gonna, they've got one office and they've got this many staff. You might want multinationals that have got multiple locations, that have always got leases renewing and are always moving, building, or they're growing quickly. But this is where you've got to look more closely, Anne, because they may not be the right clients for Ben, because the bigger multinationals might be much more brutal on terms and the margins might be much weaker. Okay, but I don't know what it is. Same for you, David. Different business types. You've got, for some of you on here, it's wholesale, it's retail, right? So for you, Mike, it's interesting. So people that climb regularly, that they might expect a cheaper deal on a per visit basis. But having said that, some people are fanatical about climbing. Some people are just hobbyists. And by hobbyists, mild hobbyists, they go occasionally, they go sporadically. Whereas other people are like, absolutely, they're not just climbing regularly, but they're also in the cafe regularly. They're also buying the kit regularly. They're also right. And that's why you rack it up, because they think nothing of spending £160 on a new pair of climbing shoes, whereas somebody that's a complete novice, they might balk at that price. Okay, but the regular climbers might be buying a new pair of shoes. Well, the rate my daughter goes at it every 6 months, right? So who are your ideal clients? That's the point. So what is the difference between 1 and 2? But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to come back to that. So who's your typical client and how is your ideal client different? And the key to this, Steve, is not to go with your instinct. You've got to look at data. Because if you're going with your instinct, you'll have confirmation bias. The really most valuable impact of this job is when you spot discrepancies that you weren't previously aware of. That is when it becomes powerful. And inversely, let's do the Pareto principle from both ends. So who are the bad clients? Some of you are causing yourself so much aggravation now, Dave. You're causing yourself so much hassle, Billy, because you've got some really shitty clients and you're tolerating them. Right? I remember a particular example when I was doing the much bigger seminars and conferences where somebody took me to court. They took me to court over a damn workshop ticket sale. Right? And it was absolutely ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't care for customers of all sizes, because I think you should, but I'm not a fan of treating them all equally, because they don't spend the same amount of money. They're not the same value to you. So I'm for you being biased towards your highest quality, highest caliber customers, on weighting more resources towards them. And sometimes you win, Suzanne, by just saying, who are the shitty clients? Are there any correlations here? How do we identify? Do they come from a particular lead source? Right? Or is it age, sex, business type, business size? Are there certain personality traits which suggest to you that they're not a good fit? So let me give you another good example for me, Sonia. Like, so you've been around our community for multiple years. You may have seen this, okay? Because again, I don't always get it right, even though on balance. I figured out over time that people that are hugely only about sales, and especially if it goes with their flashy with money, aren't good clients. Right? They aren't good clients for me. If they join, they're all about ego and they tend to burn out and they don't last more than a year, or we kick them out sooner than that. The people that really last, if you think about the people typically that are around 5, 6, 7 years, they're normally much more humble. They're committed to the cause for a long term, like building and evolving their business, and they're not afraid of hard work. right? And often that kind of ego, flashy with the cash, often goes with age, right? Is in my experience. So me in my 20s, I was much more flashy with my cash than I am now. I look poorer now to my son, who still complains that I've got rid of the supercars, right? But it's like I look poorer, but I'm actually much wealthier. So if you're after a B2B client that's got a certain level of wealth, you kind of go, oh, okay, there might be a discrepancy there. The question is, what is it for your business, right? How are their objections, concerns before buying different versus typical clients? Okay, so I just did a coaching session with a client this morning that Suzanne is in a bricks and mortar business, but they just tried a little info products and they launched it and they did really well and they sold kind of 25 or 32,000 pound courses. Okay, so it was a massive little win for them. I mean, the business makes high six-figure profits, but they tried this little supplementary product business as a little hobby, almost a little test. But what they've already noticed within 3 months and is 2/3 of the clients paid in full and a third had a payment plan. They paid the £2,000 over 3 payments. Guess where all the complaints are coming from? Guess where the refund requests are coming from? The people that are on the payment plan. Now, that doesn't make them good or bad clients, but it might give them indicators. It's like, okay, is it that they've got a weaker business in the first part, so they're not a good fit? Is it because it was a bigger stretch for them? I don't know. Ben, the question is, what does it relate to for you? Okay, so given this, right, I'm looking at it from both ends. You're going to go, what is the difference between your typical clients and your ideal clients? And then given that, how do you attract more ideal clients? Like, do they hang out in a different location? Right? Do they communicate differently? Right. So let me give you the metaphor. And forgive me if you've heard this before, I've done this to death, but that doesn't make it any less true. So let's say, Steve, that you've got a friend, or you've got 2 friends, and somebody else in your network is getting married, and they're getting married in New York next month. Okay. And one of your friends is called Andrea. And Andrea's got to get into New York next month because she wants to be at this wedding. And Andrea, her whole life, she's only ever flown first class. She earns £500,000 a year in the city, and she's only ever flown first class, and she's a multi-millionaire. Okay. How does Andrea decide who to fly with? So if she's got to decide, James, to get to New York the end of next month for a wedding, and she just found out about it today, how does she decide who to book the ticket with? Any of you, either tell me in the chat or unmute yourself, whatever you prefer.
Excuse me. I guess obviously it's who she trusts to give her the best service the most, and what she's looking for, not price.
Yeah, so who she trusts. So that might be who she's flown with before, right? It could. So Steve said convenience. Yeah, like as in it's easiest for them. Service. So she's flown with them before, and she knows that they've got the best service. That could be booking, but that could also be on the plane, or that could also be at the airport. Okay. Anne says it could be flight times to suit. Yep, great. So it's like, well, I'm not going to fly in the middle of the night just to get it for 100 quid cheaper. I'm going to fly like a reasonable hour. I'm going to fly at 10 a.m., not 4 a.m. Okay, great. What else might she use as criteria? Somebody. Yeah, Mike says comfort, ability to work while flying. Yep, so comfort might be like, I want the the lie flat seats because I'm going to sleep. It might be that they've got Wi-Fi service, right? So the point is, there's a lot of different things. Now, that doesn't mean that she's stupid about price, but all things being equal, price isn't the denominator. She'll rank some of those things. We don't know which ones because she's a hypothetical person, but some of those things she'll rank highly. Let's say, alongside Andrea, there's another friend that you've got that's got to go to a wedding. His name's Andrew. And Andrew, his whole life, he's working class. He makes minimum wage, so he's kind of making what, £24,000 a year. And his whole life, he's only been on a plane a handful of times, and he's flown economy. How does he decide which airline to fly with? How does Andrew decide who to book a ticket with? Yeah, it's obvious, Sonia. Price, Steve. Yeah, that's it. Money. So how might they do that? How might Andrew decide the price? What he's going to do is he's going to go to a price comparison website and he's going to search and find the cheapest flight. And if flying at 4 a.m. saves him 100 quid, he's going to do it because 100 quid represents 10 hours of work. Right? Okay. Any deal he has. Now, so you've got Andrew and you've got Andrew. So tell me this. If we were marketing our airline and we wanted to attract Andrews, what does the headline look like? It looks like cheapest flights to New York. Because that's what he's looking for. What impact does that same headline have on Andrea? Turns her off. It turns her off. It actually repels. In fact, I've got a friend, I won't say his full name, but his first name's Steve, and not the Steve that's on this call, just for clarity, Steve. I'm not, but I've got a friend called Steve, but he has a place out in Ibiza, and he drives 2 hours further to get to Heathrow rather than his local municipal airport, because the local municipal airport, which does fly to Ibiza, is Ryanair, and he hates Ryanair that much. He'll drive 2 hours to get to Heathrow just so he can go business class. That's how much he hates Ryanair, right? Because he's valuing the service, he's valuing the flight being on time, not losing his bags, he values the lounge, etc., etc., etc. Here's the point. You guys on here, or most people that kind of listen to this, argue I've got first class or business class service in my business. But who's your marketing aimed at? And actually, so I'm not going to repeat, because I'm recording, I'm not going to repeat your comments, Suzanne, but yes, I would agree with you. Ryanair's, yeah, are an interesting company. So the it's made me chuckle and completely knock me off base. The point is that they've got a first class business, but their marketing's economy. And then they sit and complain like, why can't I grow my business? Because they're advertising, we've got the cheapest flights to New York. And then they have to deal with all the Andrews. And they're not getting the Andreas. And the marketing message for Andrea may be directly opposed, diametrically opposite to what it is for Andrew. Right? Okay, so the question is, how does this show up in your business and how can you test it? But it starts with, you've got to figure out, you've got to go through and analyze who they are. And then once you've analyzed and figured out who the top 20% are, who the bottom 20% are, you then go to steps 4 and 5. How do you attract more of the Andreas and fewer of the Andrews? Right? And then you're going to go, okay, we want more customers of this type. We want fewer customers of this type. What can we do to attract more Andreas and fewer Andrews? Great. And then this is all in the worksheet. And then you'll end up with like, right, what are your top 3 actions? If you followed this exercise, which is going to require you, if you're going to do it properly, Ben, you're going to have to go away and you're going to have to analyze your data. If you do it from your memory, you'll be biased. And I'm going to tell you, you're going to miss the things that will really give you a win from this is if you find some data points that challenges your current beliefs. Right, I'm not saying that it's always there. Sometimes you might be really dialed in on your business, Steve, and you go, actually, I know exactly who they are, but I'd still look at the data anyway. And then you go, yeah, the data supports it is exactly who I think it is. Okay, but I'd say be open to changing your mind. Be open to unusual discrepancies. I can't tell you the number of times I've done this and we find weird and wonderful discrepancies. Sometimes it's radical. Sometimes, James, I've seen clients that are running hard and fast, convinced that they want Andrews because Andrews are the best. But then when we dig deep into the data, we realize they're the worst clients and actually they need Andreas. Right? So yeah, Sonia says, one of my team did some work on this last year and came up with 2 aspects I hadn't realized. Okay, good. Right? So stay open. You've got to look at the data and look at what it's telling you. So you've got to look for factors. I mean, we track many dozens of different bits of data for different clients, criteria on their business. And some of the discrepancies are fascinating and some of them are really, really quirky. So actually, it's a little bit of a tease, David. If you think back to when you joined Mastermind, have you ever thought that Gabriella asked you some unusual questions or when you signed up some slightly quirky or weird questions, I categorically guarantee you they're there for a reason. And it's because we figured out over time there are certain leading indicators that make them people far more likely to be high quality customers for us. Okay. And people don't believe me when I say this, but I've had many occasions where people come up and say, yeah, we want to join your program. We want to spend £20,000 with you, £30,000 with you. And we say no, because we know it's not going to be worth the aggravation, because they're the bottom 20%. Okay. But the further upstream, you can nip them in the bud. This isn't a fail safe, Suzanne. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get it right. But if all of a sudden you're clear that it's Andrea that you're after, and I want to be clear, Andrew might be the right client for some businesses. Okay. But if you're clear in your business, you're after Andrea's, and you optimize your marketing for that, all of a sudden, Ben, your life becomes significantly easier. I've had clients that have been obsessed with the wholesale part of their business and realize that actually net, it's losing them money and they need to switch to retail. The only pain in the backside, Ben, is I've also had clients that have done the exact opposite. When we've really analyzed it, they thought all the money was in the retail. But actually, when we really got into it, it was the wholesale, right? Or with you, it might be from the different arms of the business, right? Okay. And don't get me wrong, I'm in favor of going after all channels. But the reality is they're not all equal. So don't treat all lead sources as equal. Don't treat all customers as equal. Don't treat all product types as equal. You need to be discerning with where you spend your energy. Where do you invest your energy in order to make it work? So the worksheet, which I just flicked through at high speed, which was those 6 steps, okay, of how to identify your typical, your best, your worst, how to find more of the best, how to eliminate the worst, and then the kind of key takeaways is all at that QR code. It's also at danbradbury.com/ideal. But that's the gist. So really the outcome, Steve, the takeaway, and is how do you identify your ideal clients, get more of them, and get rid of the ones who are a pain in the ass. Then all of a sudden you'll start making a lot more money, but also your business will be a lot more fun.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. 3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 steps to improving your profits and cash flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.